that happened, I couldn't believe it. They even keyed a racial epithet, which made it a hate crime. And it was not good. So it can get ugly, and we don't want it to get to that. All right, so levels of organization. Okay, well, this is still in chapter 1 of the Merriam textbook, and they just kind of show you a nice figure of small to large, right? The smallest level of study in this class is atoms and molecules, the discipline of chemistry, which you took, okay? And then those things can form like little organelles that can form the functional machinery of cells. The cell is the basic unit of life. So in this class, we need to be cognizant of where we're going. Molecules is chemistry. We have some chemistry in this class. I'll focus on certain parts of that chapter, probably get to it Friday. And then those molecules can form organelles, which kind of comprise the machinery for cells. Cells is chapter 3. Okay, at the cell level, what I said was you can see cells under our microscopes at 400x. But cells, you usually have a main cell type at the tissue level, going from small to large. A cell by itself is useless. It's kind of safety in numbers for cells. They do well in great numbers. Tissues. Tissues is chapter 4, and there are 4 basic tissue types. Happens to also be chapter 4. And those types are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Teach those in great detail when we get to chapter 4, but for now, let's just say that cells comprise tissues. Okay? And in the example they're giving, for the cell, the example is a smooth muscle cell. So if you put a bunch of smooth muscle cells in layers, that comprises a tissue. Smooth muscle is a tissue, a type of muscle tissue. Now, tissues comprise organs, and that's the next level of organization. Organs, the strict definition is, they're made up of more than one of these 4 basic tissue types. Composed of more than one tissue type. So in our example, the smooth muscle layer, the smooth muscle tissue is a layer within a vessel wall. The organ would be blood vessel in our example. A vessel is a container. In this case, the organ is the container for blood, a blood vessel. And our smooth muscle tissue is only one layer within the vessel wall. There are others. There's 3. And you'll learn them in 431. But just as an example, that's an organ, more than one tissue. And that organ is a part of an organ system, which is one of the higher levels here we're talking about. You know, the organ system, I referred to this earlier in your notes. The cardiovascular system, which is comprised of heart, blood vessels, and blood. So I won't relist it. It's already in your notes as an example. But that has the function of circulating blood, what I said earlier. And there are many organ systems that work together in the organism level. And of course, this class is human A&P. So that's kind of, the guy playing sports. All the organ systems work together. We'll learn half here in 430. You'll learn the other half in 431. So as an organ systems overview in chapter 1, this is a common figure. Okay, I remember drawing this figure my first day of physiology. I'm just going to show you the picture here. What it's showing you is how organ systems kind of interact. And they put the centerpiece as the cardiovascular center, the circulation of blood. So maybe we should note that. How about I just say organ systems work together? I don't think you need to know the details of this figure for Unit 1 in my class here, but just to talk over what it's showing you. It shows you that blood goes round and round. It circulates. I think most people know this. But that's the life-giving blood is supplying oxygen to your cells. So to get nutrients to your cells, you have to ingest food. Your digestive tract is simply a tube from mouth to anus. And along the way, you absorb nutrients into the bloodstream that have circulated. You have to get oxygen into the bloodstream in exchange for CO2. That's the function of the respiratory system. And you have to excrete waste right here. And that's what the kidneys are for. So the kidneys basically filter all the blood plasma and you excrete the waste. The color of your urine is basically the color of your blood plasma. Your urine is a filtration of blood. That's it. So they all work together, and when you make it through 430, 431, you'll have studied them all. Okay. Now, if you examine a human cadaver and you study all the organ systems, what we call viscera, let me write that down. In anatomy, the term viscera means contents. Basically, organs. But if you were to do a dissection and you empty out all the organs, all the contents, you're left with body cavities. And the cavities are spaces that have names, and you have to know them. Let me advance the slide. Let's start with the dorsal body cavity. If you look at the cranial and vertebral cavities here and along inside the spine, inside the vertebral column, that's the dorsal body cavity. So within it you have cranial cavity, that's your brain case, right? And the space for your spinal cord is the vertebral cavity within the vertebral column. Vertebral. You'll see your, well, basically you got your spinal cord. Okay, in the front anteriorly, you have the thoracic region. Let me go back to the previous figure. The thoracic cavity. Your chest cavity, right? If you remove the chest plate, when I do it, I usually get garden shears and big ones, and I cut through the clavicles first, crack, and then I cut through from top to bottom the sternum, and then I cut up the sides along the ribs, and along the ribs, and I remove the anterior chest plate. And what I see inside are mostly lungs. Okay, so the chest cavity is basically the space for heart and lungs. Mostly lungs. So the name for the space for the lungs, they just call them pulmonary cavities. The term isn't there, but I should write it over here. Pulmonary cavities, space for lungs. The lungs occupy most of the space of the thoracic cavity. It's mostly what you see. Usually the first thing I look for are black deposits, right? Evidence of smoking. If a person was a smoker, I see a lot. Okay. Usually if I see a little, I say, oh, probably not a smoker, probably just breathing the Sacramento air. Okay, all that campfire air probably left some black deposits in their lungs, that bad air. That's why we canceled class last semester. Lungs. Now, the space in between the lungs, they call mediastinum or mediastinum. There's superior and middle, and let's just put mediastinum as a cavity space within the thoracic cavity. Mediastinum. Think of it as the space between lungs. Not much space left, but you have everything else. You have the heart and all the other things, right? Heart and all the rest of what's called the thoracic viscera. Now, thoracic is spelled Thora, but it's a CIC thing, but pronounced thoracic, not thoracic, right? Okay, then you have this interesting thing here, the pleural cavity and the pericardial cavity. It's hard to see from the picture. What you can't appreciate is the heart and the lungs are both covered by a double membrane. Okay. Write that down. Both covered by a double layered serous membrane. I think if I could try to draw like an anatomically picture, Valentine's heart's coming up, but it doesn't really look like that, but you get the idea. Blue is like if I draw one membrane around it, that covers it, and then there's a second membrane that's around it, covers it. That's what I mean. And the space between the membranes right there is a cavity. Okay, so if it's the heart, you call it the pericardial cavity. It's a fluid-filled space. Pleural cavities, I can draw those a little bit. Lungs kind of like take up space around it. In red, those are the lungs, and you draw a double membrane around those. Well, anyways, the space between the double membrane surrounding the lungs is the pleural cavity, a fluid-filled space, both of them. So both of these are fluid-filled. That's why I said serous membrane. That's the secretion. It's a fluid-filled thing there. So anyways, those terms are there. The kind of a trick question is, what's in the pericardial cavity? And students want to say the heart. That's incorrect. Technically, It's fluid inside there. Okay? The space for the heart is in the mediastinum. So the inferior border of the thoracic or chest cavity is formed by the diaphragm, your breathing muscle. So that's its function. It's a breathing muscle. Its structure is kind of a boundary between chest, ab cavities. In fact, diaphragm is just a generic anatomy word that if you look up the word root, it means membrane. That's it. Diaphragm means membrane. However, this breathing muscle, for this, put in context, it's the border between thoracic abdominal cavities. That's what it's for. Border between. Thoracic and abdominal cavities. You know, when you learn about the diaphragm later, you'll learn that when you breathe in, inspiration, the diaphragm flattens, helps your chest expand. And when the diaphragm flattens, that's why your belly pushes out. Okay, because the diaphragm is flattening and pushing all the digestive viscera in your abs out. So that's the diaphragm. So this whole big space is your ab cavity, okay, inferior to the diaphragm, abdominal cavity. Well, what's in there? Mostly digestive viscera, all your digestive organs. To keep going inferiorly, the abdominal cavity is continuous with the pelvic cavity in your bony pelvis. Okay. It looks like they drew something in there, but there's no membrane there like there is up here. So, abdominal cavity is continuous with pelvic cavity. Pelvic cavity. Continuous with ab cavity. What's in there? Mostly repro and urinary structures. So, repro, urinary structures. And I'll also put it, the end of the digestive tract is in there. End of GI tract. And sometimes people refer to it as the abdominal pelvic cavity because they're continuous spaces. So take it as a whole, the thoracic, ab, pelvic cavities sometimes can be called the ventral body cavity. Okay. Ventral body cavity includes thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic cavities. If you ever hear someone use the term peritoneum as a cavity space, that's usually what they're referring to, this big space from chest all the way down to pelvis, the peritoneum. Also called the ventral body cavity, and that's good for the spaces. Okay. For the abdominal region, since there's so many organs in that region, clinicians often grid it out. So when a patient presents and they're touching, it hurts here, doc, or hurts there, doc, you can kind of, see where they're touching and write it in the chart. If it's quadrants that you're using, I'll just use abbreviations for brevity's sake. RUQ, excuse me. LUQ, RLQ, in the left lower quadrant. For right upper, right lower quadrant, upper lower, and left upper, left lower quadrant. And you can see the organs that are in there. I won't make you memorize all the organs that are there now. But it's useful, right? If you could just kind of get it down to a quadrant for a patient's chart. Or if you want to put a tic-tac-toe grid on it. Those terms are used too. So if it's a tic-tac-toe grid, you go to the top three, you're kind of at around the chest area. Right hypochondriac, left hypochondriac, and in the middle, epigastric. Right hypochondriac region. Left hypochondriac region, and in the middle, epigastric region. Turn Mr. Skeleton around here. See on the skeleton where it's like not white bones, but this brownish stuff, that's actually cartilage. Okay, it's not bone, it's cartilage, and it makes the chest a little compressible. Anyways, the word for cartilage in anatomy is chondro. So right there, chondriac, because this region is right beneath the costal cartilages, the cartilage of the rib cage. Have you ever heard the term hypochondriac? What's a hypochondriac? Somebody's always paranoid they're sick, right? And the reason why that name stuck is they always come, oh, it hurts here. Oh, I don't know, it hurts here. They always grab that region. Yeah, I guess the term stuck. Oh, hypochondriac, yeah, that's what you are. Because of that region, because they're always like touching this area. Epigastric refers to the stomach. It's the region that overlies the stomach. Okay, let's do the middle three. So you got right and left lumbar regions, umbilical region. Oh, and notice right and left is the patient's perspective, correct? Not as you look at it. Right lumbar region. Left lumbar region. Umbilicus. Umbilical region. Your belly button. And that's a good landmark. As it turns out, in terms of physics, all gravity pulls any object on Earth at one singular point. We call it the object center of gravity. In humans, typically, the body center of gravity is a little below the belly button and a little behind it. Okay, so it's kind of like center of gravity right there, umbilical region. Also, bottom three. Okay, so you got left and right iliac regions, or inguinal, and then hypogastric, or pubic region. Right and left you could use either one of those terms, iliac or inguinal. I'll go with inguinal. Right and left inguinal regions. And right in the middle, that's the pubic region. You can call it that or hypogastric. Hypo means below. This is the region below the stomach. Okay, so those are the 9 regions for they call it the abdominal pelvic regions. You know, I wanted to get further, but this is a good place to stop, since I said I'd end a little early to allow time for students to show me prereqs. So I'll dismiss class now. I'll see you Friday. Just to give you a heads up, Friday's going to be wall-to-wall lecture. I'm a little behind because of the holiday. But if you want to show me your prereqs or anything else, now's a good time.
Do you have a list of who needs to show you prereqs? Or?